Well, welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. Very happy to welcome Rowan and Ashley Miller. They're from Holmes County, and their organization is called The Neighborhood. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Susie.
Rowan and Ashley, first of all, Ashley, you are from New York, or where? You were not born in these areas, right? You're not from
No.
these parts. Okay. Tell me a little bit about what brought you to Holmes County.
Yeah, well, I was actually born in Trinidad. It's an island in the West Indies. And then my family immigrated to America when I was just about 5, almost 6, and I grew up for the most part in Brooklyn, New York.
What do you remember about the immigration process as a 5 or 6-year-old?
Yeah. Honestly, whenever I think back of those times, I really think back, and there's a lot of anticipation. I had also a lot of anxiety just because it was so different. We moved here in the winter, and we never in our lives felt such freezing, cold weather. I was like, what is this
Why
thing?
did we do this?
Yeah, we had to get coats and wear, heavy coats for the first time. So it was definitely different culture, different food. So it was different for sure.
Well, what did you think of snow once you got used to the cold, though? That would be kind of fun for a 5-year-old, maybe some ice skating.
Yeah, the snow was definitely really cool because we had only, you'd only see it on TV. I remember just I don't know, I was always so freezing that the snow was at least a good treat. Like, it was like, okay, if it's going to be cold, at least have some snow and we can have
Yes.
some fun.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
what was it? And just before I jump on to the next topic, what was it that
Yeah.
brought your family here?
So, a funny thing, my dad is actually a conservative Mennonite pastor. Right now, he has been for many, many, many years. He was a pastor of the church in Brooklyn, New York. But what brought us to this country was, at the time, my father wasn't a Christian. So he came to this country seeking more nightlife and brought his whole family along to America. So when he tells his testimony, a lot of people are like shocked because he's such a conservative Mennonite pastor now. But yeah, we never know what God's going to do.
Oh, isn't that the truth? And
Yes.
one other fun chapter of the story kind of brings us to where we are now. Somehow you met Rowan Miller, because there's some dots to connect between Brooklyn, New York, and Holmes County, Ohio.
For sure. Yes. I met Rowan just this past year, and for me, it was through a vigil. Him and his sister had wanted to plan a vigil for the community, and he had reached out to me and just asked, like, kind of my opinion and what I thought, and it was such a relief, honestly, to hear from someone within my own community wanting to do something that had to do with my background, that had to do with where I was from. And I'm a Christian woman, but I'm a Black Christian woman also. So that was really encouraging.
Rowan, what was it that made you want to hold a vigil? And is this about race relations? Was that particularly what the vigil was pertaining to?
Yeah, I would definitely say that was the driving force.
And what was it that just gripped your heart about this?
Well, we all saw and kind of were aware of what was happening around George Floyd and, his death and kind of the wider national response to that. And I think it just felt like a time frame when people were ready to kind of be receptive to having this conversation, which I think is a hard conversation, especially in this area. I think it's something that's not not commonly talked about. And so I think I felt like, now there's a movement to host something that would be a little bit more, around that conversation. And, I think I'm a social worker by trade and by training. Went to Goshen College and graduated there just last year, actually. And something we talk about a lot in social work is trying to utilize the resources that are already around you. And thinking specifically about social justice, you want to utilize the folks who have been doing the work in your community rather than just coming in and, thinking of something and doing it. So Talia, my younger sister, and I both were kind of motivated to talk to Ashley first, just because I knew her name in association with the neighborhood and just kind of as someone locally in the community who was interested in social justice and things like that. So that's kind of where we decided to reach out.
What was the response? I think a lot of people assume that urban areas are going to be holding lots and lots of vigils and lots of conversations. Rural areas, maybe not so much. What kind of response did you get?
I think it was a good response. I don't know, Ashley, you can feel free to add too, but we had a good turnout. I think even just talking about it doesn't do it justice to being there. I remember finishing the evening and just feeling really empowered, and like it was a time when people were really there listening, taking it all in. At one point we talked about it kind of being even like holy ground, that little spot that we had gathered, just because of the weight of what we were talking about, but also the honesty with which people spoke and the honesty with which people listened, I think was what I really took away from it. I don't know. How did you feel, Ashley?
Yeah, for me, I thought it was just a really empowering event in many different ways. Two of the pastors, we had 4 local pastors that were able to speak, and 2 of them were Black men, and they both stepped up to the mic, and the first thing they said was, "I didn't even want to be here today." And I think that spoke a lot, just because the price of speaking up sometimes is really big, especially as people of color within our community. And so I think that was huge for me, is that it was a time where their stories could be told. We're not an organization, actually. We're actually a movement of people. And so we're based on storytelling. So that is something that's huge within our movement, is hearing the stories of those within our community that has been unheard.
Yes. Everybody's got a story. That's why we're here.
Yes.
Everybody's got a story. You tell one that is heartbreaking, I think. Now, help me fill in the blanks with this one. Were the 2 of you riding in a car and got pulled over? Is that what happened?
My husband and I.
Yes. Ashley, talk to me about that.
Yeah. So, my husband and I, my husband is from Amish Mennonite background.
And his name is what?
His name is Morgan Miller. So, like many of the Millers.
Yes.
And so,
right, many Millers.
Lots of Millers and not necessarily related, but yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, like Ashley and I have no relation that I know of, so you could probably dig and find one way far back. But
distant cousins.
Yes, exactly. 47 cousins.
So I didn't mean to interrupt, but we will clarify the relationship. But you and your husband, Morgan Miller, were in a car together. And what happened?
Yeah. So my husband and I were in a car. We had just been married not even a year. It was the first time that my siblings and my family was coming from New York City to visit us. And we lived in New Philadelphia at the time. And we were headed out to just go and make a quick Walmart run. And my younger brothers were in the back seat, and one of my sisters, and we decided we're just going to go quickly. My husband jumped in the front seat. I jumped in the passenger seat. We were on our way there, and a police officer pulled us over. And right away, because of what you're taught as a person of color when you're younger, you make sure your hands are seen. You make sure that the light is on in the car, and it's just things that I saw my dad do growing up, and we were taught. So my husband was not taught that way, because he is white, and so he had never had any negative experience with police officers either, and so he pulled over, and he just seemed really confused because we were in a very low speed limit zone. The police officer pulled us over, came to the side of the car on the driver's side, and looked in, and he asked where we were going and where we had come from. And my husband responded and just said, we're just going to Walmart, sir, and we're just from down, we live right down the street.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept looking around at my sister and my brothers in the back. My brothers were still little. They were about 8 at the time, and the other brother was just in his preteens. And so the police officer then started questioning my husband, and then started questioning us in the car. And multiple times he asked what our social security number was, and also what if we had ID on us.
Wow.
And I think that was
Yeah.
the most confusing.
If
just
I can
because-
interrupt, I would think,
Yeah.
yes, in Brooklyn, New York, you
Yeah.
were prepared. You assumed the position. This is the drill.
Yes.
We all know the drill. We've been taught this for a while.
Mhm.
Morgan probably was, what is going on?
Yeah, he was so confused. And, when we talk about it now, he looks back, and we've had multiple experiences like that in different parts of the country, actually. But that he's never had a negative experience with police officers until he married a brown-skinned woman.
Well, now,
And
when
I
he
think that-
asked the officer, "Why did you pull me over? I wasn't speeding," and the officer
Yeah.
replied, "What?"
So after we had been there for a while, and actually 2 more police officers came to the scene,
What?
then they had searched him and questioned him in the back of the vehicle. And then he came back in when we were going to leave, and they said, you're free to go now. And he said, by the way, what was I pulled over for? And he said, oh, your license plate light was out.
Mm-hmm.
And I rolled my eyes a little, and my sister made a sound in the back seat, and he looked over like, what? And we tried to explain to him as we pulled out, what was happening, and he was so confused, and he was like, nope, I just need to get to Walmart. I'm going to get this light bulb replaced. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
And we got into Walmart's parking lot, and he jumped out of the car, went to the back, and came back into the vehicle. He closed the door. He looked over at me, and he said, the license plate light is on.
It was fine.
And
mm-hmm.
that was the look on his face. I'll just never
Yeah.
forget, just because I knew that it's kind of the look on your face when I talk to my 11-year-old son about these things, the look of
Yes.
lost innocence.
Yes.
And unfortunately, like for brown-skinned children, they lose their innocence so early. And for my husband, he was married before he was able, to lose his.
To experience that. Well, I'm sure it's just a look of disbelief. Like,
Yeah.
I can't believe in the year 2020 we're even discussing this. But
Yeah.
clearly something has welled up to the surface again and is ready to be healed. Do you get that sensation? Do you feel that these conversations are more productive than perhaps in the past, and that you've got a generation now of young people that are ready to just say, let's deal with this? It's been it was a birth defect of the United States of America that I think it's healing time. We thought we fought a civil war over it. We thought that we then revisited it in 100 years later in the 1960s and dealt with things then. It seems that now it's really being addressed, and perhaps more productively. And let's pray. I mean, we all need Jesus, and
Yeah, I think that it's definitely, if I can be honest about it, I think, though, with the civil rights movement within the United States, unfortunately, I think there's pockets of America that it never really happened in. And I think, if I'm being honest, here within our community, it was one of those pockets. When you don't have a lot of diversity within your population, then the civil rights movement almost couldn't have happened here. You know what I mean? Because there wasn't a lot of diversity here. And so I think that this is our civil rights movement now within our community. And if we allow God to come in, not politics, right?
Amen.
Not the state, but if we allow Jesus to come in and to be able to sit down and listen, just like Jesus did with the woman at the well, sit down across from those different than us, and not, dominate the conversation, but actually take a posture of listening and learning and truly hearing the pain and the experiences of the Black and brown community within our community, I think that is really where healing can take place.
Yes. It takes making a friend. You need to make a friend. And you get to know that person as a person. And then you can have some deeper conversations. I'm looking at the clock. We do need to take a short break. We will be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community. Welcome back to Our Community. Susie Thomas visiting with Rowan Miller and Ashley Miller of Holmes County. And they are with a new movement called The Neighborhood. And as you were saying, some pockets in the United States that didn't really become impacted by a civil rights movement 50 years ago are now, because in Holmes County there probably wasn't much diversity, and it has now arrived. The movement has now arrived to Holmes County, and with some great results I'm hearing. You guys are doing some wonderful things. I do want to bring up, there was a basketball team a while back, and I wish I could remember the name of the coach. He was an African-American gentleman, amazing coach, and now there is even a sports facility named after him. I think he passed away of cancer a few years ago.
Thinking of Perry Reese.
That's exactly who I'm thinking of. Thank you. Thank you, Perry Reese. I think his impact on a group of Amish and Mennonite kids who were really good basketball players, and his impact in the community was very, very well received, and he was beloved. Would you agree, Rowan?
Yeah, I mean, from what I have understood growing up in this community, certainly a name that carries a lot of weight. I mean, if you live in Holmes County, especially East Holmes, you know how notorious Highland basketball programs, both men's and women's are. And that building they play in is the Perry Reese Jr. Community Center.
Yes.
So I think that alone tells you the weight with which his name carries around here for sure.
He worked his way into the hearts of everyone in the community, and he was an amazing basketball coach. Just an aside, my kids went to Heritage, played for Heritage, and got beat by Highland that year. He was an interesting, but it was two African-American coaches playing against each other with primarily Caucasian kids playing the basketball. It was an interesting looking finals in the tournaments that year. It was really, really interesting. But my gosh, we're talking about a guy who really, I think, those young people growing up would look at race completely differently because they knew, loved, trusted, had been mentored by their coach. And you have more and more of those kinds of relationships and those kinds of friendships, then these conversations can really get going. Here's a question for both of you. What are some good questions to ask that perhaps a black or brown person could ask a white person, and perhaps a white person could ask a black or brown person when we are ready to start talking about race?
I think even keeping it open-ended questions, which again is kind of a skill we've learned, or at least I learned in school regarding social work. When you're talking with someone and you want to hear, an honest story or an honest kind of account, of how their lived experience has been, what their life has been like, you want to ask open-ended questions, things like, just tell me about your lived experience, or, what's been your experience living in this area, things like that allow people, I think, to take the conversation where they would like, and then they're able to kind of discuss as much of their lived identity as they want to, or as they feel comfortable. I think that's a better approach than to ask maybe more like poignant questions or questions about something specific, just because it's easier to open up to someone if it feels like they're, allowing you to kind of lead the conversation.
And just kind of, what's your story? Tell me your story.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
During the George Floyd everything upheaval, someone said, it'd be good to ask some of your friends, how are you doing? What do you think about that, Ashley? How are you doing?
Yeah, I think that reaching out to your black and brown friends and just letting them know that you're there. I wouldn't, if I'm honest, I wouldn't ask how you're doing because many of the times, especially because of how exhausting it is to
Yeah.
be a person of color in America over the years, but especially within the last years. I think that many times, even if you have an illness and someone asks how you're doing, it's hard to answer that question. So instead, what I would recommend asking is more, how can I be, how can I
Hmm.
help you this week? Can I bring you a
Mm.
meal?
Mm-hmm.
Can I pick up your kids and
Mm-hmm.
take them to the park? And so I think those types of things are harder because it takes a little more effort. You know what I mean? And I think also when you reach out is also just letting them know what you're doing to help. So if you donated to a Black and Brown organization, or if you're listening and you're learning and you're educating yourself on your own to maybe speak about those things, I think it's such an encouragement to us to know that our white allies are there and they are learning too, and um, educating themselves as well, and looking for ways to be even better allies for us during this really hard time.
Hmm.
Is it okay to still just get together and hang out as friends and talk about all the things you normally talk about, like your kids and,
Hmm.
stuff that cute shoes and
Yeah,
more
yeah.
superficial things? Does everything have to be exhausting?
No, I mean that's a great question. I really feel like that is okay if you allow space. If
Hmm.
I come in and I've had a really hard day or really um, maybe racist encounter, and you
Yeah.
allow space in that gathering for me to share my pain. So I think that is just allowing space for that. So you can
Hmm.
talk about shoes and you can talk about kids, but if I come with a heavy heart, it's just
Yeah.
allowing me to share in that space. So I think that has been the hard thing with a lot of Black Americans within our Christian circles, is just being allowed to share our pain, knowing that it makes, I think, a lot of our white allies uncomfortable, but understanding that Black and Brown people within the Christian realm even have been uncomfortable for many, many, many years, if not, a century. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
I think and Rowan, jump in here. I'm just going to say some words now, and please forgive me if they are just really inappropriate. Growing up, I was taught to be colorblind. Now I'm told
Mm.
that is a completely racist way to be. But I was told be colorblind, get to know the person.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
all look different. We're all different
Yeah.
shades. We're all
Yeah.
multiple shades, and the irony of how much time and money white women particularly spend to try to make their shade darker, that the
Mm.
irony of that is mind-blowing. But we were just told to get to know a person as a person, and you don't discuss a person's color any more than you would discuss any other feature. But
Yeah.
but now I think the idea is to really appreciate our differences, to really, I don't want to zone in though and only focus on how we're different, because with my friendships, we've all focused on what we have in common, and, a shared, particularly, sisters in Christ, and just the fellowship that we share. It's very precious to me. And I don't want to turn it into a skin deep only relationship. Now, is that a horrible
Hmm.
thing to say?
No, I think if I can respond, I think your question comes from a very good place. I think a lot of white folks have this kind of misunderstanding or just need to understand kind of this whole concept of what color blindness means, because I know I know from myself, even growing up as a kid, it was something that was maybe subtly reinforced for me just through pop culture and things.
Mm-hmm.
I think the issue with the whole concept is just that to say you don't see color or you should look at the world colorblind doesn't necessarily then honor what that person's lived experience actually is.
Right.
So the purpose of like you want to just get to know the person for who they are is absolutely true. We're not trying to label, and when you get to know people, you want to, not see the differences necessarily. But I also think getting to know a person, truly, especially, if they're a person of color, is allowing them to discuss what that means for their life. So if you tell them, your skin color isn't important to me, we're all the same, you're actually in some way telling them that this really important part of their identity and their life isn't important, that you don't see it, that you wouldn't feel comfortable with them talking about it, which I think in effect, in a very short way really shuts down a lot of conversation between people of color and white folks.
Yes.
And that whole concept of colorblindness has really, I think, been a large part of why the civil rights movement happened, and then things have not really progressed in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And the Reverend Martin Luther King talked about, the most dangerous person being the white moderate, the person who feels like they're doing, something good about racism because, they're not racist and they have, black friends and things like that. That is not the same as being anti-racist. And that very much ties in with the whole color blindness versus seeing what a person is and who they are and honoring it.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
It does. Ashley, your response to his response.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think that you brought up a good point when, Susie, when you said that as white people, you want to tan, you love your tans, and yet to say that you're colorblind was just like, wait, what? Even some people would even go as far as to say, well, I forget that you're black, and I'm like, I don't know how to feel about that, because deep down, I don't think it's necessarily true. I think that what we're trying to say, like Rowan said, is more the idea of I don't want to judge you, based on the color of your skin, which I think is a beautiful thing. But I think it does shut down the conversation when you negate my color, when there's many things in our society that is a different experience for me because of the color of my skin. So it is kind of just dismissing my lived experiences.
Yes. And that is a perfect way to end. Thank you so much to both of you. How do we find out more information about the neighborhood? How do we become involved?
Yeah, we have a Facebook page, the neighborhood. You can type it in, and we also have an Instagram, the Neighborhood HC for Holmes County. So the Neighborhood HC is our Instagram account. We update, especially the Instagram, a lot more with our events, our upcoming events. We have them just every so often whenever somebody in the neighborhood, in the community, reaches out and wants to be involved. So there are many different ways to be involved. You can DM us, send us a message anytime.
Wonderful. Rowan Miller, Ashley Miller, thank you so much for all you're doing in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.